Welcome back to the Live Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. My friend Dan Feldman is back with us, the redshirt dietitian, the master's of science degree, highly educated, and one of my favorite resources on evidence-based nutrition. Welcome back.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me on again.
Celiac disease. What percentage of the population actually has celiac disease?
Depends on the study you look at, but ballpark, approximately 1% of people. In one of the better meta-analyses that I've seen, approximately 0.7 of the population, I think it was the world population, had a biopsy confirmed celiac disease, whereas 1.4% had a serology positive. So basically what that means is 0.7% had a biopsy of their small intestine that confirmed small intestinal damage, as a result of celiac, whereas 1.4% had the blood tests that were positive for the celiac antibodies, but they may or may not have symptoms. So a few different studies might say, like in North America, maybe 0.5%, but 1% ballpark in general of people is a nice kind of round number in terms of people who have true celiac disease.
That number is a lot lower than what we would have thought, given the way that people are talking and acting. I think the buzz over, gluten intolerance, which we're going to dive into, and celiac disease is sort of dimmed down compared to where it was. And I think the book Wheat Belly, when it came out, which is well over a decade old, I think was kind of the crux of it blowing up. But I guess, maybe we can even define what, that in layman's terms, what is celiac disease? What's involved?
Okay, so celiac disease is an autoimmune condition where someone has celiac, they eat gluten. So gluten is, a protein that's found in wheat, barley, and rye. They eat that and it triggers an immune reaction. That immune reaction damages the small intestine, and that can essentially impair nutrient absorption. Specifically, the damage is to the small intestinal villi. They're the little kind of like hair-like structures which help absorb nutrients. And, for these people, the only treatment is to just strictly avoid gluten for their whole lives, pretty much.
And what common symptoms are associated with it? How dangerous is it?
So the common symptoms, the more common symptoms tend to be gastrointestinal in nature. So diarrhea, abdominal bloating, discomfort, constipation, nausea, vomiting, weight loss are all very common. However, there are also some symptoms that are not gastrointestinal, so fatigue, iron deficiency, anemia, something called dermatitis herpetiformis, which is basically like itchy clusters of bumps and blisters on the skin, low bone mineral density, and osteoporosis are also some kind of symptoms that are not just gastrointestinal. So not everyone presents kind of with the more classic sort of diarrhea, which comes from that kind of lack of nutrient absorption. But it is kind of like what's most common. And there are definitely some people who don't actually have a ton of symptoms despite intestinal damage as well. But in general, that's kind of what you would see for these people who have that true celiac disease. And it's generally something that is diagnosed with by a gastroenterologist, oftentimes in combination with a primary care doctor. But really, the gastroenterologist would be the one who would give that firm diagnosis.
Is this something that's usually discovered when people are younger, or do we find that some people who are a bit older, 20 plus, who just kind of this low grade, maybe the symptoms aren't as like the worst of the nastiest, but low grade, just feeling shitty, they kind of get used to it, then they realize something's going on, they remove gluten, and all of a sudden, like, whoa, I didn't know what good felt like.
I'm honestly not sure offhand exactly when diagnoses are most common to occur. So I can't really speak to that for sure. I know anecdotally, usually it's not like as soon as you're born, I know for a lot of people, it's like when they're in their adolescence, teens, or even early adulthood, they'll start to notice, various symptoms, and then eventually they find out they have celiac. But I'm not 100% sure, like on average, worldwide, when that diagnosis takes place. So I'm not sure for sure, but definitely for some people, it is something that can kind of just present itself after some period of time.
So is non-celiac gluten sensitivity slash intolerance a real thing?
Um, yeah, so it's a recognized, so it is a recognized clinical concept, a concept. So it is something that people experience. Now it is very variable and debated. So there are plenty of people who do not have celiac who feel better when they avoid gluten, who subjectively feel better. So in that sense, sure, it is real. Now, part of what I think kind of spurred this discussion was a recent review paper. If you want, I can send you the link to it. It's just called Non-Celiac Gluten Sensitivity, and celiac is spelled Coeliac. It came out in November of 2025, and it's a review paper that goes in quite a bit of depth as to kind of non-celiac gluten sensitivity and kind of how common it truly is, or what, whether it's truly the gluten or perhaps other things in foods that contain gluten that might be causing symptoms. So yes, it's a real thing. That's a substantial number of people who subjectively have it may be experiencing symptoms due to other things, not necessarily the gluten itself, but some people it might be due to the gluten itself.
So is it possible? Okay, let's put it this way. What percentage of the people who believe they are gluten sensitive or some wheat product actually are? And how much of this is a belief, powerful belief that actually manifests as physical symptoms?
So that's a good question. And I don't want to say definitively for sure 100%. Because like I said, it's something that's really debated. And the last thing I want to do if someone's listening to this and they feel like they have non-celiac gluten sensitivity is to walk away from this podcast thinking, well, they're saying I'm faking it or something like that. Like I'm not trying to gaslight people, right? So to answer your question, from my understanding of the literature, looking at like blinded challenge tests where people who believe they have the non-celiac gluten sensitivity are given something with gluten or not with gluten. My understanding is that the literature shows that ballpark maybe 16 to 30% of self-identified cases are specifically triggered by gluten under blinded conditions. Don't hold me exactly to that number of 16 to 30%, but based on decent amount of literature that we do have, it's less than half. So there's a substantial amount of people who believe they are experiencing negative symptoms due to gluten, but it might be due to other things. Now, does that mean that all of those people, like I said, are faking? No. Or does that mean they should necessarily change anything? Not necessarily. But like I said, 16 to 30%, well less than half. I know that now I know when I've posted about this, a couple of people have said, well, if someone has a true non-celiac gluten sensitivity, like they won't want to be in these studies. And whether that's a fair criticism or not, I don't know. So, it's not something I can say absolutely 100% sure, but that's kind of a ballpark. And from and at least what was reported in that review paper I just alluded to was that about 10% of adults worldwide self-report a gluten or wheat sensitivity, kind of a range of 4 to 15%. So
And
that's kind of what I'd say.
were they testing it by giving people something that contained no traces of wheat or gluten, but then told them that it did contain it, and then they manifested symptoms? Is that one of the things that happened?
So again, the paper that I'm referring to specifically is actually a review paper of many studies. So generally speaking, in these blinded studies, they will give someone something with gluten and something without gluten. Or there's one actually pretty recent study, which I can pull up the name of that really quick, where they gave people cereal bars, where there was a cereal bar. They either got one cereal bar every day for I think 7 days that had neither gluten nor wheat, or had wheat or purified gluten, but not wheat, but purified gluten. And people didn't know what bars they were getting. I don't remember if they were told you may or may not get gluten or if that was excluded from it entirely. And they were also supposed to follow a gluten-free diet throughout that. And then, from that study, there wasn't a meaningful difference in symptoms between the three. People had significant symptoms in all three conditions. So they tend to go like that, where people may or may not get gluten, and then they see whether they actually have symptoms or not. So that's generally how the blinded tests, tend to go.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And Macros First is my go-to app for me and my clients. Macros First has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like, one, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. Two, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And three, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of Macros First free for 14 days. Just download Macros First from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code Andrew. Okay. So, I want to point this out, and I appreciate this about you and a lot of my guests. You guys aren't soundbite machines of extreme, claims like we unfortunately see in a lot of popular health-focused podcasts or ones that masquerade as such. Instead, it's evidence-based, it's nuanced, just like the evidence is. If anybody went back and listened to the Brad Schoenfeld episode, unlike most of the hypertrophy hot takes that we see on social media in short clips, Brad was very nuanced and hedging and did not speak in absolutes and even pointed out the flaws in speaking absolutes. So I love that. So, and then the other thing, that 16 to 30% range. But what that effectively means is that whether it's anywhere near that range, there's a significant part of the population going around with a strong belief to the point where they physically manifest it, that they are sensitive to, have a negative reaction to wheat or gluten or both. And yet there's just nothing going on there. It is entirely psychological.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah.
so
Go ahead.
What could we take from that? Let's say broadly, and maybe for the individual walking away.
Okay. So I think more generally, it is important for us to challenge our strongly held beliefs. If nothing else, then to make sure that we aren't restricting ourselves more than we have to be. I mean, generally speaking, if you do really try and avoid gluten and everything, assuming you don't have celiac, that is not necessarily the most enjoyable thing in the world, to have to ask about menus and to have to restrict various foods that contain gluten that can be very beneficial. Whole grains and whole grains and other enriched grains that have a lot of vitamins and minerals that you might be missing out on, or just having unnecessary restrictions. So I think that is, if it's possible to, if someone's just assumed that they cannot eat gluten, then perhaps actually, maybe with the help of a healthcare practitioner, doing an elimination diet to see, okay, is it really the gluten? Or if we eliminate certain FODMAPs, especially fructans, does that actually alleviate the symptoms? So doing a more comprehensive kind of food elimination protocol and food reintroduction to really see if it is truly the gluten, I think is worth experimenting with for some people. And I think for practitioners, it's worth at least being aware of, at least, again, on kind of like a broader level, that essentially a lot of people, again, it was more so in like the 2010s, like you said, but still gluten is something that's very much demonized, at least to some extent. And for some people, they do need to avoid it, but a lot of people who think they need to avoid it might not necessarily need to avoid it. So at least being aware of that. And, if you are going to restrict it, assuming you don't have celiac, really making sure it isn't something else, like I said, like FODMAPs or fructans. If someone wants to kind of trial a low FODMAP diet, generally it's best to do it with, a registered dietitian. But essentially, you're eliminating all offending foods and gradually reintroducing different categories, of foods to see what you can and can't eat. To me, that makes more sense. And then the other piece of it is the belief component or the nocebo effect, which is also very much demonstrated in the literature that if someone believes that a certain food may give them symptoms, they may get symptoms just because of that. And, just anxiety in of itself can result in gastrointestinal symptoms. So if someone is anxious about a food potentially giving them diarrhea, they could experience diarrhea. So in terms of what that means practically, it's kind of messy. And like I said, if you're a practitioner, you have to know your client because depending on the person, it can be hard not to make it sound like you're telling someone that they're faking it and that they should just, that they're wrong. They're wrong about their own body, So someone might listen to all this and say, yeah, you know what, I feel better when I avoid gluten and I'm just going to do that anyway. That's fine, But again, there are some cons to that in terms of quality of life and potentially, nutrients they could be missing out on. And as if you're a practitioner, just to kind of be aware of that, I think is important too.
So I love that you brought up the elimination diet. So anecdotally, because obviously we've seen, I think, less buzz in the pop culture sphere about non-gluten sensitivity and celiac disease, but we've
Yeah.
seen a dramatic increase in interest in carnivore dieting. And I think we all know people who are mucking around with carnivore dieting. And I have had people in my orbit, clients, friends, et cetera, do it. And anecdotally, what is commonly mentioned is that they feel better initially. Now,
Yep.
what I try to, of course, I have the trust and the nuance to be able to discuss this with them, but I tend to try to go and say, well, what the reason why this often happens is because carnivore dieting effectively works as an elimination diet. It tends to be on average more hypoallergenic than, well, certainly the standard Western, diet. So they've eliminated a ton of different food types. And so it makes sense that they may immediately feel better. Now, a lot of people take this as evidence that carnivore dieting is superior, and because they don't immediately feel the long-term negative risks to LDL cholesterol and some of the other things, low fiber, et cetera, right? That stuff compounds. I think the data and literature there is pretty convincing that stuff's really risky. But what I try to do is to get them to have an open mind about reintroducing things gradually. And I actually agree with you. I think that what a lot of the stuff may in fact be is a FODMAP issue. But again, there's a whole bunch of different foods and categories that can vary by people. So it can be very hard to pinpoint the exact issue within FODMAP, whereas things like, well, carnivore is very straightforward. Blaming gluten is very straightforward. So I'm happy to hear any more context on that. But one of the other things I definitely want to get your answer on is, are there downsides, health consequences of actually eliminating wheat-based, grain-based products from your diet?
Yeah, well, I think the big downsides there would be you don't have as much nutrient diversity in your diet. I mean, if we look at the associations between wheat and other grains, especially whole grains or enriched grains, whole grain intake is associated with a lower risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes and lower all-cause mortality. I mean, these are observational, of course, but still pretty consistent. So whole grains in general and enriched grains do have a lot of vitamins and minerals, and also oftentimes are a good source of fiber, which is very, very, very beneficial. So you are missing out on kind of like an entire group of foods. Now, does that mean, for someone who does have celiac or for someone who chooses to avoid gluten or grains that they are going to die? I mean, everyone's going to die, but that they're going to like be at like a huge risk? Not necessarily, but again, it's just one more thing that you have to worry about. And if we can like you were saying, reduce the amount that needs to be restricted and really kind of do, if you are going to do an elimination diet, then gradually introducing one food group at a time. Again, if it was, kind of the traditional FODMAP, you would reintroduce one category of FODMAP at a time, or maybe you introduce one food type at a time, very, very gradually and deliberately to minimize the list of foods that you can never have. And I think the biggest issue there would tend to more so be quality of life. A lot of people who are gluten-free, whether they should be or not, tend to be more health conscious. So, they certainly can get those vitamins and minerals that are in whole grains elsewhere, eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. But again, I think it's really the quality of life piece. And, going out to eat and potential restrictions there. So, like I said, it's not like a massive risk where it's like if you are gluten-free, you absolutely should not do it. It's terrible. But I would say at least if you believe you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it's at least worth kind of considering, okay, have I really done a substantial kind of food elimination test to really confirm it's really the gluten and it's not something else. It's not like fructans, or it's not like one specific food that I'm reacting to, just to be able to have as much diversity in your diet. Having a lot of diet diversity in general is a good thing.
I'll get back to my guest in a moment. I have cool news. I will be appearing at the King Kong booth at the Arnold Sports Festival in Columbus, Ohio, March 6th and 7th. And I'm fanatical about King Kong backpacks and duffels. They are the best quality bags. I'm long done with buying a new cheap gym bag every 6 months when the last one falls apart. My biggest problem is needing to pick between my Conquer backpack, my waxed canvas core backpack, my Plus duffel, sorry, it's downstairs, my Heritage leather. This thing is so classic. It looks gorgeous. And my Edge backpack. Sorry, you guys can't even get this one anymore. And I always have one of them with me wherever I go, the gym, work, all my travel. I rarely use traditional suitcases anymore, and the convenience is unmatched. And you can save 15% on all your orders. Go to www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. That's www.knkg.com/Andrew59676. Don't worry, just go to the show notes, the link's in there. And I hope to meet you in person at the King Kong booth at the Arnold Sports Festival. So you mentioned that someone can offset its absence with more fruits and vegetables. Is that a pretty good tactic to cover the bases for someone who is, for whatever reason, but certainly verifiably celiac or gluten intolerant? Are they good if they just make sure they're attending to their fruits and vegetables?
Well, I would just say eat a more varied diet. Just make sure that you're getting plenty from other food groups that you can eat in general. Fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes. If they're not like vegan or vegetarian.
White monsters? Does white monster count?
Sure. Having white monster.
I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just fucking with you. But
yeah, I know. But nuts, beans, legumes, fruits, vegetables. So other plant foods that don't have gluten. And then if someone isn't like vegan or vegetarian, then a moderate amount of low fat, lean animal products, just to kind of get to maximize your diet diversity of things that do not contain gluten. And so just having an overall healthy diet minus the gluten. And I don't think I need to tell your audience what an overall healthy diet is. We all kind of know what that is. So just getting your diversity elsewhere. And I tend to be of the opinion that most people, it won't hurt to take just a general one-a-day multivitamin. They're very cheap. Whether they do anything is kind of debated, but it's like 25 cents per multivitamin, and it's not a bad idea. So yeah. To answer your question, if someone has celiac or they really cannot eat gluten, just make sure you have a well-varied diet from other food sources, especially plants, so you're getting plenty of vitamins and minerals and fiber.
Eat your Flintstones, kids.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I've mentioned a couple times how I think the peak of this trend was probably 12 to 15 years ago, give or take. How much do you think a social identity around these things plays into their, and this can be specifically to gluten intolerance and avoiding it. And I think one of the ways this manifests is people showing up in restaurants. And you mentioned quality of life, and I think for some people, it's a genuine concern, and therefore they have to say this when they go to restaurants. But I also remember when this was at its peak. I think for some people, it was almost like social signaling, and it was performative in a way. And that's not to demonize people with legitimate concerns, but we definitely know there was definitely a lot of this sort of shit. So you can comment specifically to this or generally to any dietary thing where, hey, it's a trendy thing, so therefore people may make it part of their social identity. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that what you're referring to is not specific to gluten. I think gluten more so in the late 2000s, 2010s was kind of like the hot thing, but people, and I think it's just the way human nature is, we tend to vilify what we believe to be bad, and we tend to form tribes. I think it's just kind of hardwired into human nature, just from like evolution, that we tend to form tribes and look at like those who don't agree with us as bad. I mean, I think a big part of kind of the carnivore and animal-based movement that you see, it's a lot of that as well, where they will, say like, oh, seed oils are terrible. It's the same thing. It's this, and I'm not going to get the whole thing with seed oils, but it's like this
I
massive
did.
villain. They're
I did it with
and they're
Daddy Lennon recently, so it's covered. You
okay.
and
Yeah,
actually, I'm gonna totally interrupt and be an asshole
yeah,
here. I remember it was quite a while ago. You put up a post about seed oils, and some of these like carnivore bro types on Twitter got a hold of this thing, and I think it ruined one of your weekends because it was like just they were
yeah. It
going
was July 4th,
level and
2022. They were
you
like
remember it.
going
That
after me
wow, yeah.
personally. Yeah. But more generally, like people tend to, and I think you see it in politics too. People tend to form tribes. People tend to kind of oversimplify, and their way is good and others are bad. I think that's just how people are, and I kind of think that's just how people always will be. Like I said, right now you're seeing it like anti-seed oils, a lot of like the animal-based people. I even think you see some of it even for people among people who are evidence-based, who will kind of completely scoff off things that don't kind of align with their kind of narrow agenda. And it's more just kind of how people are, where people tend to form tribes and tend to kind of think of others as bad. And also there is kind of an identity with it where if you follow something very kind of strictly and put a lot of effort into it, you're going to kind of want to make it part of your identity. And maybe that some people who are gluten free kind of see it that way, like they have their kind of structured way of doing things they put a lot of thought into. Maybe they made a lot of recipes around gluten free or what have you, so it's just
Mm.
something that they identify with. I'm not saying that that's the case if you avoid gluten, but and I think that side of things is just human nature. And for a certain time period, less so now, gluten was just a convenient villain. Just how seed oils is kind of filling that space, or artificial sweeteners have as well, kind of the same thing, where people kind of look at it as like the villain. So that is more, I think, just kind of a human thing.
Totally makes sense. All right, one last question on the topic. Oatmeal also often gets, there's confusion around it. Now, you mentioned wheat, barley, rye, right? They contain gluten, but some people are afraid that they have to avoid oatmeal as well. But oatmeal does not contain gluten, correct?
So oats are naturally, and again, this is if you have celiac, you probably know this already, or if you really can't eat gluten. Oats are naturally gluten-free, but contamination with wheat, barley, or rye is very, very, very common. Analyses of, the commercial oat supply have shown that most conventional oats tend to be contaminated with
Hmm.
some gluten unless they are produced under really dedicated gluten-free protocols. So there's a lot of cross contact that can occur. So
Mm.
for that reason, a lot of people who cannot eat gluten will not eat oats, even though it's not wheat, barley. I didn't include malt in there. Wheat, barley, malt, and rye have gluten, and then oats naturally are gluten free, but like I said, tend to have cross contamination. That also tends to be the case with some naturally gluten free flours, like oat flours and buckwheat flours. Sometimes also are contaminated with gluten, just by the nature of how they are produced.
What about vodka distilled from wheat?
I am not 100% sure. I'm not a big alcohol guy, so I'm not sure. I mean, you wouldn't be able to have like beer because of the malt. So I'm not sure.
All good.
Yeah,
I've anecdotally know people who, A, wheat-based vodkas are perfectly fine, and others who just avoid it as a precaution.
gotcha.
I don't know definitively the evidence on that one, but I thought
Yeah,
it'd be fun to
and
ask.
yeah, and like I said, I'd rather say I don't know than say something and it's wrong. So yeah.
Fair. Okay, so we want to talk about organic foods as well. And this one is still, we still hear about this all the time. Is there any verifiable benefit to consuming organic food?
So it depends what you mean when you say is there a benefit. So they generally speaking are less likely to have detectable pesticide residues and are oftentimes associated with lower pesticide exposure. That is the main thing. It doesn't mean they don't have pesticides, but they are less likely to have detectable pesticides. That is kind of the main thing. Now, does that actually translate to any verifiable difference in health outcomes? There is no data to indicate that is the case, and that the level of pesticides that you would find in, I'll go with produce, like conventional produce, is very unlikely to cause any sort of human harm. So if someone is hell bent on avoiding all pesticides, even if it won't actually make a difference to their health, and there is some evidence that yes, organic, you'll have less exposure to pesticides, but not none. But in terms of actual nutrient superiority, generally speaking, the nutritional value of organic and non-organic foods are pretty similar. Maybe some like very minor differences, but pretty similar. And there's no evidence that there's any differences in actual health outcomes. So, like I said, if someone's really, really concerned about pesticides, some people anecdotally also say organic tastes better. That's just very subjective. I don't, to what extent that's true versus like expectancy, I don't know. Um, so some people might find they like the taste better. If that's you, that's fine. And there's a small difference in detectable pesticide residues.
What's the downside of organic?
Costs more.
Can you like go deeper on that one?
Yeah. So generally speaking, organic foods can cost about twice as much as conventional alternatives. Um, and that largely has to do with kind of price premiums where they just it's just um, in order to keep organic systems competitive and profitable, they just cost considerably more. Like I said, now whether that has a difference in terms of like the farming or the whether there's a difference for like the organic farmer people who are doing the cultivation or whether there's an environmental impact, which might be kind of what some people are not sure about. I'm not 100% sure. Again, as a dietitian, that's not an area that I'm as familiar with. I don't want to kind of give a definitive answer there as to kind of what difference it actually has for farmers or for producers. Again, I know it sounds kind of like overly simple, but what I would kind of be comfortable saying is organic versus conventional, nutritionally, very, very, very similar in terms of outcomes, health outcomes, very, very, very similar. Um, Detectable pesticides, you'll be less likely to have detectable pesticides with organic. Will that actually affect your health? Probably not. And like I said, as far as differences in environmental impact, I'm not 100% sure. Something that I think you had asked me before the show is whether organic is like mainly a marketing label to
Hmm.
justify an inflated price. And whether organic is worth the price premium, I think just kind of determines what it's based. It really depends on what consumers value. So if someone values like farming practices with lower pesticide detection, maybe it is worth it for them. Um, But again, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that it's only marketing. I think a lot of it has to do with consumer demand. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what I would say about it.
I
I
love
don't
the
think,
nuance.
yeah. Like I said, I struggle to really kind of give a definitive answer, and I know that's like probably not ideal for a podcast, but I want to be honest. In terms of like, maybe there's someone who's like a food scientist or a farmer who's a listener who has more to say as to whether there is a meaningful difference in organic versus conventional and whether that has any difference in terms of the actual farmers. I'd be interested to know. But I just don't know. Like I said, for most people, it's mostly going to be like, yes, organic will be a little bit more expensive. Do you care about the small difference in potential pesticide residues? And, some people, like I said, find it tastes better. And some people, they just want to eat organic because they have their reasons, and that's fine. But, what I would say is more generally, and I know when I posted about this is kind of what I said is, eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, regardless of whether it's organic or not. And that will be monumentally a more important step for your health than really picking apart whether you should do organic or not.
I think there's another important thing to address here, and that's the way that this messaging, especially the loud proponents of organic and some of the messaging there, and I think there are a lot of false narratives baked into it about that it is substantially healthier, but we have to factor in the cost. And then we know that in our modern world, not everybody has the money. And I detest the way that the word gets weaponized and bastardized, but not everybody has the privilege to be able to spend a lot more money on nutrition. And therefore, if vulnerable people who are food insecure, who don't have access to this or cannot afford it, are fed a message that, it's really important to eat organic and that it's unhealthy to not eat organic. That's where one of my biggest pushbacks against aggressive promotion of organic nutrition food is for me.
Yeah, and I would push, and I agree with you. And I would push very hard against the narrative that organic is healthier. My response would be based on what? Assuming, like I said, the pesticide, like there's a small difference in terms of like pesticide exposure, potential pesticide exposure, but where is the evidence that there's any meaningful difference in terms of actual health outcomes or even nutritional quality, like nutritional content? Where is it? It doesn't exist. There's no research that I'm aware of that actually shows that. Like I said, if someone wants to do organic and they're passionate about it, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just like with the gluten, if someone just prefers to not have gluten, that's fine. But it's really, I think, and I mean, this could be said for both the gluten and the organic and lots of other things, but it's when you kind of try to push your narrative that's not based in like a hard science and it is very nuanced, and you will try to make it really black and white. Like, yes, you have to avoid gluten because it causes inflammation, or yes, you have to eat organic because conventional foods is bad for you and organic is healthier. When you push that on people, that's a problem because these are statements that are absolutist and not supported by the literature. And this gets to really what you were saying. I mean, most people, a lot of people don't have the money to spend on organic, and making substantial behavior change, health behavior change is hard enough as it is. I mean, we see how many people struggle to lose weight and maintain it, or to stick to a gym routine, and to struggle to consistently eat in calorie deficit because change is hard. Eating healthfully for someone who is not like you or me, someone who's like not like who does fitness as a living and who's obsessed with it, for just like a regular person, who they're busy, maybe they have kids, it's hard. And you don't want to make it harder and more confusing than it has to be. And that's what a lot of the messaging that you're referring to, whether it be with or you have to eat organic or gluten is terrible, or I would even say the same thing could be said for like seed oils are terrible, or, the more ludicrous claims you hear from like the carnivore community is that it just makes things more complicated and harder for the average person than it has to be. And it's not based in science.
And you a couple times mentioned that there's no evidence of differential health outcomes, but one of the things we didn't say explicitly, and I think it's said or at least alluded by proponents of organic, is that it somehow is better for fat loss. Now, if you equate food types, as I understand it, there's not a goddamn lick of evidence to suggest that
No.
organic food,
Yeah.
there's no potential mechanism where organic food would help someone lose weight more. Now, let's say what's probably actually going on here is, let's say someone makes the flip between eating standard North American diet, very high in processed food, very high in ultra calorie food, and then shifts over and then goes to a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot of lean meats, and then a lot of that stuff's organic. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
You change the fucking quality of your diet. It has nothing to do with it being organic.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that, I mean, you were mentioning the carnivore and people feel better. Part of it, I think, is yes, food sensitivities. People are doing a massive elimination diet. But also, if you go from eating the typical Western diet, typical American diet, and you're in Canada, but like lots of processed foods, excessive calories, lots of sugars, fried foods, just eating like crap. And then you go to eating a carnivore diet and you feel better. It's not the carnivore diet, it's that you went from such a bad eating pattern that's very common in the Western world to something else that isn't that. And you ended up eating in a calorie deficit. So you lost weight. And then you saw all of these massive improvements because you lost weight and because you then reduced your cholesterol and, maybe you improved your testosterone because you lost fat and your cholesterol is improving. And so, yeah, like you said, if someone switches from a objectively poor dietary pattern, typical American dietary pattern, to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, and it happens to be all organic because maybe they're getting it all from a health food store and it's organic. It's not the organic; it's the eating a lot of the fruits and vegetables and having a lower calorie intake. So yeah, I agree with you completely.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries, and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes. Beautiful. All right. We didn't plan to touch on GMOs, but I think a lot of people, organic and GMOs almost go hand in, or non-GMO goes hand in hand. I also think there's a very heavy marketing component to it. And you may not have some of the stuff top of mind, but is there anything at least, as it relates to organic and the intersection of GMO/non-GMO foods that's relevant to this discussion?
Um, I would say, generally speaking, the same thing in that there's no evidence that like GMOs versus non-GMOs has any difference in terms of, um, you know, health outcomes. I mean, GMOs, genetically modified organisms. First off, I think a lot of people don't even understand what that is when they hear that.
Mm-mm.
So they are basically hybrids, food hybrids that are created using genetic engineering by like altering or introducing different traits, perfectly safe for humans. Lots of studies. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Forgive me. I mean,
Yeah,
one
you're
of the
good.
things that has been engineered into some crops is pest and disease resistance, which actually may result in the use of less pesticide, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So crops can be genetically modified to be more pest resistant. So then you would have to add less chemicals. GMOs can also prolong shelf life and add nutrients.
It can
It can.
improve crop yield, which actually may have implications for the amount of land needed for
Yep.
farming certain things, which has environmental implications. It
Yes.
can infuse certain nutrients. What is it? Golden rice And what is the nutrient infused in golden rice? I believe India might be one of the main places, and blindness is an issue there.
Yeah, you're really testing my memory, but I believe
Sorry,
it's no, you're good. I believe it's vitamin A.
I'm
Um,
sure it's vitamin A. I really do think that's what they did with it. So, but I think a lot of people have a very strong emotional reaction when they hear the words GMO, and next you know it's Satan and all this sort of stuff. And just from what I understand of all the evidence, is just this stuff is more conspiracy theory that there is any substance to it.
yeah, I agree. And yeah, the golden rice, it's the genetically modified rice engineered to produce beta carotene, precursor to vitamin A. And it combats widespread vitamin A deficiency in developing nations. So it's a GMO and it's really, really, really good.
Hmm.
And yes, I think the whole anti-GMO, extreme pro-organic, where it's like if you don't eat organic, you're gonna blow up and die. Um, I think that's definitely like really bad messaging. But I think people who are really entrenched in that, it's really hard to change their minds.
Totally.
That's kind of my thinking. And also a lot of it is marketing. Like the non-GMO project is really kind of like a marketing ploy. You'll see that a non-GMO label on products that like have no like on like tomatoes
Water,
or something like
water,
yeah,
water,
non-GMO water. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of it
non,
is just marketing. Yeah.
what is it? Gluten-free water.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's actually a thing, but I mean, it's a metaphor for what we are seeing.
Yeah, so it's just kind of marketing and it doesn't really mean anything. Also GMOs, it's not actually changing um like eating GMOs does not like change your DNA or anything like that. So yeah, not to get kind of too hung up on that. But yeah, again, kind of tying it all back together. If you want to eat organic, that's perfectly fine. In terms of like verifiable differences, there is a verifiable difference in terms of the potential for pesticide residues. That's not to say that conventional will have a lot of pesticides. It's still going to be very low. But if you were hell bent on avoiding all pesticide exposure, and that was the most important thing for you in the world, then sure, buy all organic. Go knock your socks out. That I'll give to you. But in terms of the actual micronutrient quality, and we do have research on this as well as actual health outcomes, it doesn't make a difference. Like I said, if any farmers, food producers want to reach out as to like the actual production side of things, environmental impact, I can't really like speak to that per se. But it's more so like, do you want to pay a little bit more for organic or not? If you want to, fine. If not, it's fine too.
Beautiful. All right, let's have some fun with a little bit of remaining time. Quote, no coffee isn't bad for you. In fact, it can help you live longer. Talk to me about that.
So, coffee, and I think it's important that we differentiate coffee from caffeine. Caffeine is the compound in coffee that gives you energy. Coffee, in and of itself, in observational research, moderate intake is actually associated with a lower risk of dying early. We've got large observational studies, meta-analyses show that coffee consumption, there's sort of an inverse association between like to a point, more coffee and dying, and your risk of dying early. So I know there was one 2019 analysis that found the lowest risk of dying early was at 3.5 cups of coffee per day. I'm not 100% sure how they define a cup. I want to say it was maybe 6 fluid ounces, but I have to check. And 2.5 cups per day for heart disease mortality, so dying from heart disease. 2017 study meta-analysis found that coffee consumption was associated with a lower risk of dying early and dying from heart disease, like a 17% lower risk for dying early. This is observational data, so it doesn't definitively prove that coffee causes people to live longer, but the findings are pretty consistent across many populations, and there's also some mechanisms by which by which coffee can be beneficial in terms of living longer and staving off like heart disease. So coffee, again, not necessarily caffeine, but coffee has hundreds or thousands of bioactive compounds besides caffeine. So things like chlorogenic acids, melanoidins and diterpenes, which have potential benefits, at least mechanistically, which can help contribute to coffee's antioxidant capacity. There's also some studies that some um, uh, compounds in coffee can influence oxidative stress pathways and detoxification enzymes. Again, this is kind of from cell culture and animal models, so take it with a grain of salt. But that shows some potential cancer fighting potential theoretically. Again, very theoretical, but when you have observational research, you also want to see, okay, there's an association. Are there mechanisms? And there are some, mechanisms by which coffee could potentially reduce your risk of dying early. And there's also some kind of positive behavior, like neural effects, neuroprotective effects of coffee, of the compounds in coffee, which can be good. Now, again, this is coffee, not necessarily caffeine. My understanding is that those benefits you can also get from decaffeinated coffee, for someone who's caffeine sensitive. And in terms of like risks, obviously you don't want to have, and this is where, naturally coffee contains caffeine. So you want to be mindful of how much caffeine you're having. Having too much can obviously impair sleep quality, which is bad for a lot of things. And then potentially anxiety, jitters. If you have a lot of coffee, that can also help with going to the bathroom, which could be a good thing or bad thing depending on the context. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh yeah, and then
please.
I was just going to say unfiltered coffee can potentially increase LDL cholesterol, but filtered coffee won't have that effect.
Yeah, I French pressed my coffee, and my aunt, who's a physician, had mentioned this, and so she'd shifted away from that to filters. And so, from what I understand, there is some issue there. Something I think is actually worth pointing out, because I'm quite fascinated with healthy user bias with people who are eating, very conscientious about eating non-gluten. It makes sense there may be some healthy user bias. People who are prone to eating a lot of organic food, definitely healthy user bias. But I do not think that there will be healthy user bias in the cohort that drinks coffee, because it's not necessarily uniquely associated with people who are really healthy and active, right? It's very commonly drank. So
Yeah,
I would say that the data is pretty robust that way.
I would think so. Again, I mean, it's observational, but I mean, you do in this observational data, they do adjust for confounders. And if actually speaking of that, for a while, this was maybe more so like 20 plus years ago, a lot of people thought drinking coffee was bad because there were observations where people who drank more coffee died earlier and got lung cancer. But then it turns out people who, at least in the past, who would drink coffee would also smoke cigarettes. And there was a very strong correlation between smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. So it wasn't, so then once they adjusted for that, no, coffee did not cause lung cancer. It was the cigarettes. So yeah, so you wouldn't think you would have that same kind of healthy user bias. So again, if someone isn't currently drinking coffee, that doesn't mean that now you have to start drinking coffee. Like I don't think it's that strong, but for people who like demonize coffee, I mean, like I said, if you're having too much of it, for one, again, this is the caffeine component of the coffee. It is a you do develop tolerance and withdrawal. So it is an addictive. The caffeine is by definition addictive. So, if you do have several cups of coffee every day and you go without it, as I see you with your white monster, like that, it does have that addictive component, and there is a tolerance and withdrawal. If you have an addictive personality, it's something to keep in mind. And then, like I said, having it in close proximity to sleep is a bad idea. But coffee in and of itself, also if you're not adding tons of sugar and a bunch of other stuff to it, where it's like a dessert, is actually pretty beneficial in terms of long-term health outcomes.
And don't do coffee enemas. We don't have time to even like the resolve to go with that one. That's just lunacy. So
Right. Yes, I have not looked into coffee enemas, so I don't have a position on those.
We don't have a lot of literature on this, I don't think so.
I haven't looked into it, so I don't know. But
Fantastic.
Conversation for another day.
Hopefully not on this show. Who knows?
Yes.
If I ever have a guest you know that I have sold my soul if I bring on a guest who is pro coffee enema and that gets aired. Okay.
Yes.
I will enjoy my weight monsters. That is the line of as far as I will jokingly but seriously, if Monster Energy ever came out to me and said, we will pay you money, I'm like, I'm drinking them anyway. I will absolutely accept a sponsor for that. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but there are a lot of lines that I will not cross. That one, I'll dance all over it. Everybody can follow you at Powerlifter Dietitian, and that's the technically correct spelling. It's Deitit.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. At least in the States, dietitian is Dietition. I know a lot of dietitians get pissed off when one of those T's is replaced with a C. But for my username, it's Powerlifter Dietitian, dietitian with two T's.
I'm sure if they type it in on Instagram, if they're not already following you, you're going to show up, right? Whether they get to the T or not, right?
Sure. Yeah, this is true.
I think we're probably safe. I follow you. I love your media. People will get a lot of it. It's actually some of the most well thought out, most researched, practical, and accessible nutrition-based stuff, combating a lot of the nonsense. So if you guys want more, please go follow Dan. And you could go back and I don't remember the episode number. I apologize, but you've been a previous guest on the new format. It's also great. So if you want more, go check it out. Dan, thank you. Anywhere else you really want to send people?
Instagram is generally best. I'll say at Powerlifter Dietitian. That's sort of where I do most of my stuff.
Beautiful. Thank you again. I appreciate you.
Thank you.